Lord Briggs, in your opinion, why is local historical preservation important?
Well, I think it is because we've got a wonderful heritage. We've got a heritage of buildings, which is just as interesting as the heritage of books. And we've also got wonderful countryside in relation to the towns and the villages. So I think we really want to safeguard it in the interest both of nature and in the interest of culture, if you can put it both ways.
And this would apply both to your country and to ours?
Oh yes, I think every country has got this heritage. And of course the time scale differs in different places. But a reason why it's particularly important in the 20th century to do something about it is that you feel that much of the past is under threat. And while you've always got to have your eyes on the future, I think nonetheless that we are the trustees of the past.
What are you doing in Britain to preserve your historical past?
We're doing quite a lot. We have got in our towns, in most of the towns, civic societies of various kinds. And they really watch the fate of what is going on to the old, in relation to the old things. And by law too, we have certain areas of the towns which are designated as conservation areas where they're really interesting. And you can't really interfere with the distribution of buildings within those areas, or change in fact the style and the character of the buildings too much. And we've also got a very active national society for the preservation of the countryside. So that as far as both the rural and the urban environment is concerned, there's quite a lot being done. Active people and some legislation in the background too.
When you talk about the countryside, you're talking about buildings in the countryside.
I'm talking about buildings, but I'm also talking about hedges, roads, the whole pattern of the old countryside, which of course has changed a great deal with agricultural change which is taking place at the present time. But I think there's just as much interest in the villages at present as there is in the towns and the cities.
I don't think we take as much interest in preserving the countryside as we do the buildings.
You've
here.
got far more of it. We've got really a very, very small amount of space, if you can put it that way. Therefore, the space acquires a value in itself, which it wouldn't do where you've got these great areas of wilderness. There's very little real wilderness in Britain, except in Scotland and Wales.
Do economic conditions dictate support for historic preservation? For example, high unemployment, a low pound, etc.
They don't really have a great deal to do with it. I think in practice they do make the task of raising private funds much more difficult. And as far as public funds are concerned too, they're being squeezed at the present time. So if you could say that there are less resources available, but the amount of enthusiasm, I think, is as great as it's ever been in my lifetime, so that, in a way, the resources don't necessarily match up to the enthusiasm. But I think the interest in preserving and adapting the past, it's not just a question of preserving it. I think that putting it in too conservative a way, I think you've got to think about adapting it to present needs. This, I think, is greater than it's ever been before.
What are some examples of adapting the past to the present need?
Using interesting old buildings for new purposes, not necessarily changing their facades or their appearances, but doing new things inside them. In Hull, for example, which is one of the great ports of the north of England, there's been a lot of fascinating work done in the old dock area there, converting warehouses for studios, for theatres, for workshops of various kinds. And although there's no business really passing through Hull docks much at the moment, as there used to be in the past, the area looks extremely interesting. It's been revived. And in some of the villages too, you'll find that the old buildings which once had a very different purpose are being used for various kinds of community purposes. And of course this is also true in the United States. I think part of the problem in Britain is that some of the buildings which it's most important to adapt are very old buildings indeed. They're Tudor buildings or even the medieval buildings, and the cost of adaptation is extremely large. You want to do things inside them and keep the basic appearance from outside much the same.
So you don't necessarily have to take a purist approach to historic preservation. By that I mean maintain the building as it was originally built. The facade is the important part.
The facade is often the most important thing. Sometimes, of course, you do get an extremely interesting interior. But I don't regard this task as being incompatible, if you like, with having some genuine interest in the future. I'm not really a conservationist who is completely caught up in the past myself. I believe too that in present circumstances maintaining the interest of some of these buildings is part of the whole tourist approach to England, which is increasingly important economically. And people from all over the world come to see the buildings. They don't want to see some very bad modern buildings that have been put up. They want to see what is there as part of the heritage of the past. So that there's an economic value to be attached to it, as well as a social and cultural value as well.
In local historical preservation, what are the priorities? Buildings, landmarks, what?
I think the priorities are to maintain the character of groups of buildings and not just individual buildings. I'm more interested really in the combinations of buildings that represent, if you like, a way of life of the past than I am in the monuments, as far as my own private interests are concerned. Certainly there are national and local monuments that you've got to keep. These have got great interest, and you're very good at keeping these in the United States. But I like to keep these conservation areas, because I think once you let an area rot, if it's a bit of erosion starts in some place, the whole thing goes. So that I believe that it's not just a question of keeping particularly good buildings, it's a question of keeping whole environments where you can, within areas which you can adapt around the edges and you can change them even a bit inside. But you don't really basically alter the way in which the buildings were related to each other. And the buildings were related to each other in that particular way because people were related to each other in a particular way in the past. And ultimately it's the people really that one is interested in.
And this is what makes the whole area interesting.
That's what makes the whole area interesting. It's not just the stone, the brick, the mortar. It's the feeling that this is part of a way of life which was there in the past.
Now, how about funding? We've had some federal funding here,
Sure.
and you have federal funding in your country. Most of our support appears to be from the grassroots.
Yes.
Is that true
That's
in your
true in
country?
England, yes, yes. A lot of voluntary activity goes on. I am chairman of the Winchester Preservation Society. Winchester is a very beautiful old town with cathedral, wonderful buildings. And there's an enormous amount of effort put in by dedicated individuals voluntarily.
Like what do they do, for example?
Well, they actually do everything from sometimes working under scholarly supervision on a site, sometimes it's an archaeological site, right through to organising coffee mornings, parties and so on to try to raise money to get people more interested. I'm also very much involved with a national body which is called the Heritage Education Group. And we go round to schools in various parts of the country, and we do three things when we're in a town during the course of the day. We first of all have a conference with all the people who are involved locally and the representatives of the local authorities, the local politicians. We have teachers and planners together, and they don't always mix too well, but we've gradually got them to mix. And then we have children. And we usually we get the local children to put on an exhibition which is open to their parents, and it's open for the whole of the week. And then we get the 10 to 12-year-olds to take us on a town trail. And they've produced all their details of what the interesting buildings are as you go around the town. And we have an absolutely fascinating time, because you learn more from children between 10 and 12 frequently about what is interesting in places than you would do from adults in the places. So that we really genuinely try to get a sort of intergenerational thing at work, as well as bringing the different interest groups together. And I've learned more about England through going on these trips to different parts of the country than I've learnt in the rest of my life, I think.
One of your key points is that the more you can get involved, the more successful the project.
Exactly, and the more you can get young people involved, the more you've got some hope that there'll be a continued interest for the future.
Honorable Lord Asa Briggs, who is widely regarded as one of the major historians of our time. Lord Briggs is a social and industrial historian. The 28 books that he has authored range from Victorian cities and history of broadcasting in the United Kingdom to his recently and highly acclaimed A Social History of England. He is now Provost of Worcester College, Oxford, and Chancellor of the Open University. Lord Briggs will shortly deliver his lecture entitled The Image of Greece in English Literature. Prior to that, however, we have the privilege to award to Lord Briggs the honorary degree of Doctor of Laws. And so let us proceed now with the bestowal of the honorary degree at this time. Lord Briggs and President Worthen, would you kindly come forward? Throughout your distinguished career as an educator, historian, and author, you, Asa Briggs, have enriched our understanding of 19th and 20th century social cultural history while establishing standards of excellence worthy of emulation by all. Raised in a working-class family during the Depression era, you sensed early that in order to comprehend the complexities of history, you must also fathom the mysteries of economics and the fragile relationship to which each discipline contributed, graduating with first-class honors for both universities within 1 week. Your distinguished career as an educator, which began in 1945 as a fellow at Worcester College, Oxford, later included positions as reader in recent social and economic history at Oxford University, faculty fellow at Nuffield College, Oxford, professor of modern history at Leeds University, and professor of history and dean of the School of Social Studies and deputy vice chancellor at the University of Sussex. I'm honored to present a distinguished British educator and historian, the Right Honorable Lord Briggs, for the honorary degree of Doctor of Laws.
When we survey the many noteworthy contributions that you, Asa Briggs, have made as an educator, author, and leading authority on social and economic history, we are reminded of Emerson's definition of a scholar, a man who has taken up into himself all the ability of the time, all the contributions of the past, all the hopes of the future. This description is a most fitting one for you, a person with many and diverse talents whose work is characterized by scholarship and zeal. Early in your career as a professor of history and economics, you introduced countless numbers of students to the fine art of critical evaluation and thinking. Later, as head of the University of Sussex, you helped that institution gain international renown and become one of the most successful of the 6 universities created by Great Britain after World War II. Today, as Provost of Worcester College, Oxford, and Chancellor Open University, you struggle with many of the same concerns that face all university leaders, while openly challenging your colleagues to question the role that colleges and universities should accept in today's society. Libraries throughout the world bear witness to your long and distinguished career as an author and historian, a career that has flourished for almost 40 years. In addition to your works on social and economic history of the 19th and 20th centuries, you have also contributed richly to the history of communications, another of your particular interests, with your 4-volume History of Broadcasting in the United Kingdom. In recognition of your contributions to communications history, you received the Marconi Medal in 1975. Your many talents and vast experience are sought by many professional groups and associations. The Glendeborn Arts Trust, the International Broadcasting Institute, the Standing Conference for Study of Local History, the European Institute of Education, the British Film Institute, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Lord Briggs, it is a privilege for me to welcome you to Ball State University and to award you this honorary Doctor of Laws degree. By the authority vested in me by the Board of Trustees of Ball State University, I hereby confer upon you the degree of Doctor of Laws with all the rights and privileges thereunto pertaining, and award you this diploma in testimony thereof, and present you the academic hood for this degree.
Gentlemen, it's a very great privilege to present the 11th Bradimus Lecture to Ball State University. And now that I have become an honorary doctor of this university, which I deeply appreciate, I feel I have a rather better qualification to deliver the lecture than I had half an hour ago. I do believe that